Welcome to Sikhcast, brought to you by Sikh Research Institute, illuminating every path.
Hello and welcome to a special episode of the Sikhcast. My name is Holden. I'll be your guide for today as we look into a truly fascinating time of Sikh history. But our fountain of knowledge into the particular character we are looking into will be Santbir Singh.
I'm a program associate with the Sikh Research Institute, and I'm also a PhD student at York University. But I'm sort of a fan of Sikh history in general, and I like to teach and learn about Sikh history.
Santbir and I will do our best to paint a portrait of one of the most famous female characters in the Sikh story, Rani Jind Kaur, a truly complex character.
I kind of want to start quantifying this for people. Why do you feel maybe it's important for us to understand and reflect on the life of someone like Rani Jind Kaur?
I think it's really important for, first of all, to understand this period of Sikh history in general, because it's the onset of colonialism, and the impact of that colonial encounter with the British is still reverberating throughout Sikh history. She's a central figure in that narrative of the colonial encounter, of the beginning of colonialism in Panjab. She played a central role in the British coming into Punjab, both as an antagonist to the British and also later as a prisoner of the British as well. She's also interesting because unfortunately, there aren't a lot of very famous female Sikh characters from history that we know of. I'm sure there were plenty, but we don't always have their stories. A lot of times those stories were not kept. History was written by men, and we don't always remember the famous Sikh women of our past. But she's also this female figure sort of beset by all of these different political machinations that are happening all around her and trying desperately to keep the Sikh Kingdom independent. And that aspect of her as this powerful, we can call her a role model even, I think is really important for us to understand, and makes her an essential figure to study in Sikh history.
So, given the things that Santbir noted about her, I would like for us to keep that in the back of our mind. History, particularly at this point in time, was often written by men, and what accounts we have today have surfaced through the muddy waters of that complicated history. But regardless, Rani Jind Kaur's legacy has withstood that and has made a lasting impact. So, let's dive in.
Yeah, so she was born in 1817 in a town called Gujranwala, and we don't know very much about her early life at all. In fact, all we know really about her life is the fact that her father worked for the royal household, associated with the court sort of in a very secondary way, that she came to the attention of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. She was in her late teens, early 20s when she met Ranjit Singh. He was an old man at that time already. She would have gone from this small village of Gujranwala to the big city of Lahore. And Lahore was very cosmopolitan at the time. There was European generals there. There were travelers from all over the place. There was trade happening. The Sikh Empire was really the center of commerce in northern parts of South Asia, and connected to the Silk Road and Central Asia, and also to China through the Silk Road. So around this time in Europe, you've got the Napoleonic Wars happening around the time that she was born. So there's a lot of conflict happening in Europe. Napoleon is trying to take over Europe, essentially. The British and the French are engaged in colonialism in a large scale at this time in history. They're very quickly colonizing North America. South America has already been colonized by the Spanish, a century prior. Africa is starting to be colonized by the different European powers and starting to be carved up. The transatlantic slave trade is in full swing at this time. And in Asia, you have the British starting to really gain a foothold within South Asia. By the early 1800s, they've taken over almost all of India. And really the last remaining part of India that has not been taken over by the British is in fact Panjab and the Sikh Empire. So Ranjit Singh is sort of the last, what we could say, native sovereign in South Asia.
Now, what happens next is not well understood, but what is clear is Ranjit Singh's attention is captured by one particular individual, Rani Jind Kaur.
You know, her father was apparently in charge of the royal kennels, of all things. So he was in charge of the dogs that were kept for hunting, somewhat associated with the royal court, not like as a minister or anything like that. And Ranjit Singh must have, come across meeting her when she was maybe visiting her father at work one day, and he must have taken a liking to her. She was supposed to be and considered to be strikingly beautiful. In South Asian culture, women didn't have very much say in who they got to marry. So Ranjit Singh would have spoken to her father, and he would have probably agreed right away to have his daughter marry Ranjit Singh. What their early relationship looked like, we don't really know. They were married in 1835, and Ranjit Singh passed away in 1839. They weren't married for very long. They had probably just a few years together before he passed away. We don't know much about their relationship. We don't know anything about whether he confided in her, whether she was aware of the different treaties that Ranjit Singh had made with the British. They were married for 4 years. But Ranjit Singh had other wives, of course. He had multiple wives, contrary to Sikh principle, actually, where you're only supposed to have one spouse. It seems that she, in fact, was not living in Lahore at the time that he passed away. She was, in fact, had been sent away to Kashmir, which is where she had her son, Dalip Singh. Her day-to-day life, we can speculate that her day-to-day life, it must have transformed from when she was a young girl, quite hard work, to really a life where she is, sort of waited on hand and foot by all of these servants. We can sort of guess that it must have been a life of luxury at the beginning, yeah. So I think we can assume that she would have been really astute about what was happening, that there's not really a future in which the British don't invade in some way.
As Santbir mentioned, Ranjit Singh had many wives, including Rani Jind Kaur. So here's where things are going to get a little bit complicated, as he has many sons and many children that are in line to step forward and succeed as the ruler of the Sikh Empire.
Ranjit Singh had several children at that time. His oldest son was Kark Singh, who was the heir apparent, who was expected to be the next king, the next emperor after Ranjit Singh's passing. Kark Singh himself had a grown son named Nonahal Singh, who was his heir apparent. And Ranjit Singh had other children as well. There was Sher Singh, who was younger than Kark Singh. There was Pashora Singh and Kashmira Singh, who were younger than Sher Singh. And then there was Dalip Singh, which was Jind Kaur's only son and only child throughout her life. So she only had one child with Ranjit Singh. And Dalip Singh, was born in 1838, just a year before Ranjit Singh passed away. He may not have even met his father at all, in fact. And that one child ended up becoming the future king of the Sikh Empire.
Hearing that Dalip Singh is bound to be the next ruler might be a little surprising, especially considering that you heard the many other names that were in line before him. Maharaja Ranjit Singh passed away in the year 1839 in the month of Har. His body was bathed and was adorned in the royal dress and jewels, and a podium of gold was prepared for his last rites. He then passed through the palace gates and was taken along the river Ravi. And lastly, he was placed on a pier of chandanwood prepared for cremation.
After Ranjit Singh passed away, his oldest son, Kark Singh, became the next emperor.
But Kodak Singh becomes a victim of what appears to be a political assassination with poison.
You know, you can compare this era of Sikh history really to Game of Thrones. That's a cultural reference that I think a lot of people understand. There's a lot of intrigue. There's people fighting back and forth.
Through a series of murders and backstabbing, the children of Ranjit Singh began to fall. So, Dalip Singh and Rani Jind Kaur were getting pushed closer and closer to the throne due to the bloodshed that was taking place in the capital. But a powerful family called the Sandavalyas decided to take advantage of the chaos. To seize control, they murdered Sher Singh, the new Maharaja of the Sikh Empire.
At that point, there's sort of confusion as to who should be the next king.
The Sandavalyas took the opportunity to remove another rival in one stroke, the Prime Minister, Dhyan Singh,
And they kill him and chop his body into pieces.
who is also the father of what would become a difficult adversary.
A figure named Hira Singh Dogra, originally from Jammu and Kashmir, extremely intelligent, conniving. Hira Singh ends up figuring out that the best way to move forward, in his opinion, is to make Dalip Singh the next emperor of Punjab. And Dalip Singh is only a child at the time. He's only 3 years old probably at the time. And he believes that Dalip Singh will be someone who's easily manipulated, someone who he can control, where he can wield the actual power of the throne and just have Dalip Singh as a figurehead, and that he doesn't imagine that Jind Kaur will actually play much of a role in the kingdom. And so this is where really Rani Jind Kaur comes into her own as a figure within this really complicated story of this back and forth fighting that's going on, this war that's happening over the throne. The earliest sort of information that we have about her from British records is that I think there's a lot of surprise that she starts to play a bigger role. This wasn't expected. You know, there's a lot of sexism that happens around Jind Kaur whenever she's talked about in this time period. She's sort of called very ambitious in a way that's sort of a put down because she's a woman, called a seductress, someone who used her physical beauty in order to advance her career, even though there's no real evidence of that. She's sort of labeled as this figure who's sort of manipulating things, but I think that's largely because she's a woman and she's trying to play a larger role in the court. Jind Kaur is actually very ambitious, and she doesn't just want to be this sort of puppet head figure. She doesn't just want to be in the background. She actually wants to be in charge of the kingdom and rule it on behalf of her son. We should also talk about the fact that at this time, the interesting things are happening with the Khalsa army as well. And the army had sort of taken on a personality of its own at this time. The Khalsa itself was the Guru Khalsa Panth. You know, in Sikh theology, this idea that the Khalsa is the sovereign spokesperson and controlling sort of figure as a joint cohesive whole. Once Ranjit Singh had died and once all of this conflict had happened in the court, the Khalsa army had started to assert itself through what we call panchayats, which are essentially committees. These were democratic spaces where the Khalsa army by themselves sort of made decisions, which were the Sarbat Khalsa model that Sikhs used to have, where they would make decisions through consensus decision making. So after Sher Singh's death, the Khalsa army agreed with Hira Singh and threw their support behind Dalip Singh wholeheartedly. And for some reason, and we don't know why, but it's very important to Jind Kaur's story, the Khalsa army really respected Jind Kaur. And they called her the mother of the Khalsa. And they looked up to her and they followed her lead. And then Hira Singh along with the Khalsa army, goes and attacks the Sandavalias, kills them, and then installs Dalip Singh on the throne. Another very interesting part of the story that brings Jind Kaur into the story in a bigger sense. The Sandavalias were killed, and this is another very interesting. They're killed by two people. They're killed by an older Sikh general, and that is Sham Singh Atariwala, who's this sort of older general of a very well-respected army general who's retired at the time, but sort of comes out of retirement to deal with all this chaos that's happening in the kingdom. And Jawahar Singh, who is Jind Kaur's brother. So Jawahar Singh and Sham Singh Atariwala are these two figures that come in and sort of deal with this big mess, get rid of the Sandavalias, and bring in Dalip Singh as the next emperor.
With Dalip Singh now ascending to the throne and becoming the Maharaja of the Sikh Empire, it's time to turn our attention back to our central character, Rani Jind Kaur. As mother to the emperor, she's going to start playing a much larger role in this story, including making it easier for us to see the legacy she's left behind, as history books start to take note of her. Looking at the bloodshed that had just taken place, it's clear that Rani Jind is in a position where she wants her son to succeed as the new emperor, but he's still just a young boy. She's going to have to deal with the many individuals who have competing interests within her own court, as well as the British, whom bide their time along the border. In order to confront these mounting challenges all around her, she's going to have to seek the aid of the individuals that will remain loyal to her and her son, as well as be tested as a new leader in this vast struggle for power.
So right now she's in an interesting position. She's in some ways at the center of the kingdom because she's the mother of a child who's now king. He's only 5 years old. But at the same time, she's really been pushed to the side by Hira Singh Dogra, who has sort of taken on control of the government directly himself. And so the real issue right now for Rani Jind Kaur is that she wants to be in power. She wants to be in control of the state. And she wants to somehow push Hira Singh out of power. There's a famous Sikh, a saintly figure, a well-respected figure named Baba Bir Singh of Naurangabad. And Baba Bir Singh's this very well-respected Sikh. He's famous for having a very large langar, a free kitchen, which was well attended by people. And he's a former soldier in Ajit Singh's army who's now this respected saintly figure. And a few of the top nobles who are on the opposite side of Hira Singh have taken refuge at Bir Singh's dera. Dera means his encampment or his place, his abode. And the two people who have taken shelter there, one is Kanwar Kashmira Singh, which is one of Ranjit Singh's sons, 3 remaining sons, Dalip Singh being the one son, Kashmira Singh and Peshora Singh being the other 2 sons. And so one of them is still alive, and he's taken refuge at Baba Bir Singh's camp. And Hira Singh sends an army after them. He sends an army to attack them. And Baba Bir Singh, instead of getting ready to fight back or to protect himself, decides that it would be improper, it would be wrong, it would be immoral to attack fellow Sikhs. And instead, he starts preparing food for them. That's his service, his seva, as we would say. Instead of getting ready to wage war, he gets ready to welcome them. And they come with guns ablazing, and they bombard his encampment. And they end up killing him, killing Kashmira Singh, and killing the Adari Sardar. The rest of the Khalsa army is just disgusted by this and really, really upset about this. They call Hira Singh a guru killer. And Hira Singh realizes that he sort of pushed his luck and he shouldn't have made this move, and he panics. And he loads up a few cartloads with gold and jewels from the Lahore treasury and tries to make an escape from Lahore. As he's on the outskirts of Lahore, two people are chasing after him, and those two people are Sham Singh Atari and Jawahar Singh. So Jawahar Singh is Rani Jind Kaur's brother, and Sham Singh Atari is the famous Sikh general. And Sham Singh Atari and Jawahar Singh catch up to Hira Singh and they kill Hira Singh. And so that's sort of the end of Hira Singh. So what happens then is Rani Jind Kaur is now essentially the most powerful person in the state. Hira Singh Dogra has, been killed. There's no one else to stand up to her. And her brother are really the two most powerful figures right now, Jawahar Singh and Rani Jind Kaur. Dalip Singh is under their care. It's just chaos and killing and backstabbing. It's this Game of Thrones situation. So what Jawahar Singh does is there's only one remaining son of Ranjit Singh besides Dalip Singh, and that is Peshora Singh. And Peshora Singh had made a claim to the throne saying, I'm older than Dalip Singh, I should be the one who should be in charge. After Hira Singh is killed, Peshora Singh is kind of freaked out. He's scared. They send him a letter and they say, we will give you safe passage if you agree to come back to Lahore and give up your claims to the throne. And Peshora Singh agrees. Jawahar Singh is in charge of going and bringing Peshora Singh back to the capital. But instead of bringing him back, he kills him to remove this one impediment from Dalip Singh's rule. Because he assumed that as long as Peshora Singh was alive, Dalip Singh's rule would not be, really, his position would not be totally consolidated. Jawahar Singh kills Peshora Singh. And this is really too far for the Khalsa army. And the Khalsa army, which respects all of Ranjit Singh's children, is really disgusted by this killing of Peshora Singh. And they then demand that Jawahar Singh present himself to the Khalsa Army Panjayat, this democratic council that's running the army. And they demand, you have to come and show yourself in front of us in order to be judged for this crime of killing Peshora Singh. And that's where this really pivotal moment in Rani Jind Kaur's life is about to take place now.
Rani Jind and her brother are essentially the most powerful people in this area right now. They are a huge deal. So this would be like taking I suppose in America, like the vice president to trial in some ways. Is that an accurate assumption, or?
That would be an accurate assumption, or at least a minister or like a secretary of state or something, yeah. He's trying to get out of this as desperate as he can, so he tries to bribe them at first. And the Khalsa army refuses to negotiate with him, and they keep demanding that he show himself. So in order to try to save himself, he shows up on an elephant to present himself to them, but along with himself is his sister on another elephant riding behind him, and he's holding his nephew in his lap. So he's like, don't come after me. Don't kill me. I'm holding the Maharaja with me. This is my nephew. And look, my sister is here and she's essentially running the government. The Khalsa army comes up to the elephant and they grab Dalip Singh. Rani Jind Kaur has gotten off her elephant and they give Dalip Singh to Rani Jind Kaur. And she starts screaming and crying and saying, don't attack my brother, don't kill my brother, don't kill my brother. And they're just ignoring her while she's screaming at them. And she starts wailing and wailing and wailing. And according to some accounts, at one point, she gets so emotionally overwhelmed that she, in fact, throws Dalip Singh. Dalip Singh is caught by a soldier. I don't know if that's accurate. I don't know if that's people sort of presenting Rani Jind Kaur as this irrational woman who can't control her emotions, or if that's an accurate description of what happened at the time. And then Javar Singh, they demand that he get off his elephant. He stays up there and he keeps begging them, please don't kill me, please don't kill me. They send a soldier over on a horse and he bayonets Javar Singh up on the elephant. And Javar Singh falls down, and then all the soldiers surround him and bayonet him to death. Javar Singh is killed in front of his sister and his nephew. And this happened on September 21st of 1845. We're in this very strange situation where the Khalsa army really respects her. They call her mother, but at the same time, they are so incensed by the killing of Peshora Singh that they refuse to forgive Javar Singh for this crime.
Rani Jind Kaur has just lost her brother, who is also an essential part to her rule as the Queen Regent of the Sikh Empire. But meanwhile, the British on their border are preparing to advance.
I kind of want to turn our attention to something else that's kind of happening in the background while this is all going on, which are the borders of the Sikh Empire. So could you explain to us what is building up there and what's about to happen regarding the British who have decided to become a bigger player in this story?
In December of 1845, so we're looking at the same year of 1845, British are amassing more and more troops along the southern border of the Sikh Empire. Below the Sikh Empire, the border of the Sikh Empire is the river Satluj, one of Punjab's 5 rivers. Just south of that are what we call the Cis-Satluj states, which are 6 states that are not ruled by Maharaja Ranjit Singh. These are outside of the control of the Lahore Dabad, but they are run by Sikh kings, but they're much smaller states. And all of these states have made deals with the British, and they become puppet governments for the British Empire. So the British lets the kings rule, but they have prime ministers in all of these kingdoms who tell the king what to do, essentially. And so all along the southern border of Punjab, of the Sikh Empire, you have the British amassing more and more troops along the southern border. So all of this chaos in the Lahore Dabad, a lot of historians assume or think that this wasn't happening in isolation, that the British were involved in some way behind the scenes. Now, way back in the early 1800s, Maharaja Ranjit Singh and the British Empire had signed a treaty, and the treaty had made the Satluj River their border. But Ranjit Singh had some possessions that, even though the main border was the Satluj River, he had some possessions that were south of the Satluj River, so it wasn't a hard border. And part of the treaty had said that Ranjit Singh is allowed to go into his areas south of the Satluj. So on the 11th of December of 1845, the Sikh army crosses the Satluj River. They're going into the village of Moran, which they consider to be their property, and according to the treaty is a disputed area, which both the British and the Sikh Empire claims. Did the Sikh army mean to launch an invasion of British territory, or did the British simply use this movement by the Sikh army as an excuse to launch the war? So Lord Hardinge, he was the Governor General of India at the time, meaning he was in charge of all British government and soldiers in India at the time. He claimed that when the Sikhs entered across the Satluj River, that this was, and I quote, the Sikh army had now, without a shadow of a doubt, without a shadow of provocation, invaded the British territories. So in his mind, he's claiming that this is an invasion and that the British army has a right to attack back. However, 5 days later, in a letter to his personal assistant, Lord Hardinge actually says, will the people of England consider this an actual invasion of our frontier and a justification of war? So he's on one hand saying this is an invasion, and on the other hand he's saying, will people actually believe us back in England that this was a just cause and that really we can consider this an act of war? And we have a few other quotes here. We have a quote from a Major General Smith of the Northwestern Agency who says, and I quote, "Regarding the Panjab War, I am neither of the opinion that the Sikhs made an unprovoked attack, nor that we have acted towards them with great forbearance." So that's a British general talking about the Sikh battle. And what the British had done was there was no bridge crossing the Sutlej River. So the British had actually brought all of these what are called platoon boats from Bombay to make a platoon bridge to cross the Sutlej River. So it really looked like they were on the verge of attacking the Sikh Empire. And then the Sikhs cross the river themselves, and the British say, "Oh, you're invading us," and they declare war on the Sikh Empire. And that all happens on December 11th. We estimate at least 70,000 troops, 75,000 troops. So the Sikh army is smaller than the British army. The British army is larger. The British army also has access to more guns and more heavy artillery than the Sikh army does. The Sikh army does not have as many cannons, doesn't have as much large artillery as the British army. So the British army is better equipped and they're larger.
The British advance quickly and have 2 decisive victories against Rani Jind's forces.
But then there's these larger battles that start happening, the Battle of Mudki and the Battle of Firoz Shah. These are really hard-fought battles where the Sikhs have a very good chance of winning. It looks like the Sikh army is actually going to win the battle. So at the Battle of Firoz Shah, the Sikh army is actually winning the battle, but at the last minute, the general of the Sikh army, the leader of the whole Sikh army, a guy by the name of Tej Singh, and who later on we find out was working for the British, removes some of the troops from the battlefield, and the Sikhs lose the battle. They're ordered away from the battle at the last minute. And the British comment on this quite often later on, and in personal diaries and in their reports back to London, that the Sikhs are fighting incredibly bravely. You know, it's actually has to do with our Sikh traditions. You know, the fact that we receive Amrit, that we become Khalsa, and you sort of face death in that moment when you join the Sikh faith. And there's this comment that British soldiers make again and again in the Anglo-Sikh Wars, that it seems like the Sikh soldiers aren't afraid of dying. And so they're this force that's fighting not only for their kingdom, but they're fighting an existential threat, essentially. You know, the British will wipe them out, and they know that. And so the Sikhs are fighting a lot harder than the British are. And the British, their troops, the officers are all British. A lot of the soldiers are British, but most of the soldiers on the British army are Indian troops from other parts of British India. And they are fighting this battle, and they're being paid to fight. Whereas the Sikh army is being paid to fight, of course, as well. But they're really fighting because they are desperate to maintain their independence and to maintain their sovereignty. But at every opportunity, they're being sabotaged by their own generals, by their own leadership. They came so close to winning at some points that the Governor General of India, who was leading the British forces on their side, had burnt his own papers, his own private papers, his own correspondence, because he assumed that the Sikhs were about to overrun his camp and take him prisoner. You have a whole series of battles. There's the Battle of Aliwal, the Battle of Badowal, Battle of Firoz Shah. In all these battles, the same sort of thing keeps happening, where the Sikhs are winning and then they lose at the last moment. And this is where Rani Jind Kaur comes back into the story, because she is technically in charge right now. She is the one in charge of the Sikh troops. that she's in charge of the Sikh Empire. And this is where we have some controversy around Rani Jind Kaur. What role was Rani Jind Kaur playing? Was she on the side of those people who had already sold out to the British and were trying to undermine the Khalsa army? So what the goal was essentially of people like Tej Singh, the general of the Khalsa army, who's in charge of the Khalsa army, and Lal Singh, who's now the prime minister of the Sikh Empire, both people who we know for certain had already sold out to the British. What their goal was, we want to weaken the Khalsa army as much as possible so that the British can come and take over easily. Is Rani Jind Kaur on their side? Is she also selling out to the British and trying to weaken the Khalsa army so that the British can take over? Or is she actually fighting as and trying to fight back as genuinely as possible in order to push back against this British invasion? Is she actually leading the troops in a successful way? You know, the fact that the Khalsa army had killed her brother in front of her is one of those points that's stacked against her. She was heartbroken by this, devastated by this. In fact, from the historical accounts, she had entered sort of a depression after that happened and hadn't exited her room for weeks on end, and was really, really down after her brother had been killed, and then eventually started coming out and leading the government again. But on the other hand, her behavior after the British takeover is so anti-British and so in favor of Sikh sovereignty and so in favor of Sikh independence that it's hard to imagine that she had sold out to the British. As these battles continue, the Khalsa army keeps having their supply lines cut, and they're not getting food. They're not getting ammunition. And a delegation from the army panchayat, so technically Tej Singh is in charge of the Khalsa army, but in the battlefield itself and sort of day-to-day in the battle, in the Khalsa army, they're ruling themselves at this point, as we saw earlier, right? With these panchayats, these bunches. And the delegation from these panchayats comes to Rani Jind Kaur in Lahore and represent themselves in the royal court, in the darbar. And they say to her, we don't have any food. We're not getting fed. And the quote is, we haven't had enough rations for even a bird to peck at. Give us food, give us powder and shot, or we will not fight. So they're coming and they're getting desperate. They're saying, we don't have food, we don't have gunpowder, we don't have bullets. And she thinks that all of the stuff is going out to the front lines because she's making sure that all the supply lines are there and that the food is going out. She doesn't know, or she's not aware, if we're assuming that she's on not having sold out to the British, she's not aware that Tej Singh is cutting all those supply lines and not letting the food reach the front. So after they make this demand, there's this tense moment of silence. And then she gets up and goes behind a parda, which is like a cloth that women in royal courts in India at the time would sit behind often because they couldn't be seen by outsiders. It was sort of a holdover from Mughal rule, from when the Mughals ruled India. She goes behind the parda. There's a quiet, there's a silence. And then she flings her shirt at them, her bodice at them, from behind the parda. And she says, wear that, you cowards. I'll go in trousers and I'll fight myself if you're too cowardly to go fight. And they just stare down at her clothes that she's thrown at them. And they are just full of shame. And they say to her, we will go, we will lay down our lives for your son and the Khalsa Panth. And the army leaves. So the Khalsa army realizes they're being sabotaged, but they are still loyal to Dalip Singh. They're still loyal to Rani Jind Kaur. And they say, you know, okay, even if we're not getting supplied, we will keep fighting and we'll lay down our lives for you. We will try our hardest to win these battles. That moment is really one of the sort of iconic moments in Rani Jind Kaur's life, where she has really taken charge. It demonstrates the sort of fierceness that she has, the power that she has, and the fact that they're like right away like, okay, no, we're sorry, we'll go fight. And they're ashamed of themselves, demonstrates that she still has a lot of power in that moment. and she has a lot of fighting spirit left in her. Rani Jind Kaur sends a letter to the general who had retired, Sham Singh Atari, the guy who had gone and Hira Singh and caught him and killed him. And she says, we're in a desperate situation. I need you to come out of retirement and to lead the Sikh troops into battle. This is sort of the twilight of the Sikh Kingdom. We're facing our end, and I need you to lead us into battle one more time to defeat the British so we can save our kingdom. He goes and he prays in front of Guru Granth Sahib, in front of the Sikh scripture, in front of the Sikh Guru. And he prays and he makes a commitment. He says, I am going into battle and I'm not going to return. I'm going to fight to my death against the British. And really dramatically, he gets dressed all in white. And white is the color of death in South Asia. White's the color you wear at funerals. White's the color that you dress the body in at funerals. So he dresses all in white, and he famously has an all-white horse as well. And so you can just imagine this figure of this old man with a long white beard, dressed all in white, in a white turban, white clothes, riding a white horse, riding into battle to lead the Khalsa army for one last time.
This would be the last and final battle of the First Sikh Anglo War, and would define not what only happens to the Sikh Empire, but also to Rani Jind Kaur herself.
The battle happens right next to the river Satluj, and the Sikh side their backs are to the river, and the south of them is the British army. So the river is behind the Sikhs, and the British are in front of the Sikhs. The battle starts, and the Sikhs aren't doing too badly at the beginning. But then a few things happen that really cause a disaster. First of all, the British have brought all of their large guns from all over India to this battle. They have brought 35 howitzers and large guns to this battle from all over India. They brought all their heavy artillery to this one battle, and they just start pounding the Sikh army with these heavy guns, and the Sikh army doesn't really have a response to these heavy guns. The second thing that happens is that Tej Singh and Lal Singh, these two generals, Lal Singh the prime minister and Tej Singh the general of the Khalsa army, had given all of the battle plans away to the British before the battle had even started. The third thing that happens is that in the middle of the battle, Tej Singh takes his troops directly under his command and leaves the battlefield, leaving the Sikh army even more vulnerable. So the British have way more guns, the Sikh army is up against a river, they have the battle plans of the Sikh army, and now some of the soldiers from the Sikh army have left the battlefield under the command of Tej Singh, soldiers that were loyal to Tej Singh. The river is swollen this time of year. It is flooded, and the currents are very strong. As Tej Singh is leaving, he sabotages the Sikh boats that are there at the edge of the river, and he sinks a bunch of the boats. So 20,000 Sikh soldiers are trapped against this much larger British army with the river behind them. Sham Singh is exhorting them forward, and he's saying, we are going to die here today, we are going to fight to the death, we are not going to give up. And so you have a large number of Sikhs who are just all in, who are fighting to the death, fighting to defend their kingdom, desperately trying to beat the British. You have a whole bunch of other Sikh soldiers who are trying to run away because they realize the battle's been lost. But once they get to the river, their boats are gone, so they jump in the river to try to escape with their horses by themselves, and they start drowning in huge numbers. It's estimated 6,000 Sikhs were drowned as trying to escape from the battle. Sham Singh leads his last final charge into the British lines. His sword is out, he's riding his horse, he's charging full on ahead into the British lines, this sort of last desperate attack on the British. Desperate but noble attempt by Sardar Sham Singh to try to win the battle, to not give up even to the last moment. And it's sort of considered the end of Sikh Raj is this moment where Sham Singh falls in the battlefield. But this is really seen as the end of the Sikh army and the Sikh empire. The British only lose about 2,000 troops, and the British essentially destroy the Khalsa army that day. And the Sikhs are beaten.
That might sound like the end of the Sikh Empire, but it is only the beginning of what will become a new occupation of British forces into Sikh sovereign territory, which is where we turn our attention back to Rani Jind Kaur, who waits the arrival of British troops and ministers and ambassadors to discuss treaties of the First Anglo-Sikh War.
Let's get back to our main character, Rani Jind Kaur. What results to herself and her son immediately after the war?
So after the battle's done, the British and the Sikhs under Rani Jind Kaur make a treaty to end the war. It's called the Treaty of Lahore of 1846. And in this treaty, essentially what happens is that the British get to station their troops in Lahore. The Sikh Empire stays independent, but is essentially becomes a puppet kingdom of the British Empire. So they get to keep their emperor, Dalip Singh gets to stay as king, the nobles all get to keep their land, the Khalsa army is maintained in a small sort of symbolic size, and the British technically take over all aspects of the state, like all foreign affairs of the state, what the state can do. The Sikh army can't make any changes, can't add new troops. They have all these restrictions put on them. But at this point, in 1846, at the first battle, after the first battle of Lahore, the British enter on February 20th of 1846. So 10 days after the Battle of Sabran, the last famous battle. And they sign the treaty on March 9th, and then they add some changes to the treaty on March 11th. So March 11th really symbolizes the end of the First Anglo-Sikh Wars. That's when the treaty is signed, March 11th of 1846. A few big things happen. Gulab Singh, who's one of the Dogra brothers who's remaining, gets Kashmir because he had also sold out to the British. And his reward for having sold out to the British is all of Jammu and Kashmir, like the whole state, the whole kingdom, which had technically been part of the Sikh Kingdom for many years. And in order to take over Kashmir, the British make him pay 680,000 rupees. And he pays for this by taking money out of the Lahore treasury. So essentially, he steals from the Sikh Kingdom to pay the British in order to break up the Sikh Kingdom, which leads to all of these problems further down the road because Kashmir is a Muslim-dominated area, but they have a Hindu king now, Gulab Singh. So when independence happens a century later, when the British leave India, you essentially have the beginning of the Kashmir conflict, which is still going on to this day. Rani Jind Kaur is allowed to maintain her position in the government. She's still in charge. Her son is technically still the king, but remember, they are just figureheads now. So the British stay, and the British are there, and the British troops are supposed to remain in Lahore for a set amount of time. And then they're supposed to leave Lahore, and then the Sikh Empire is supposed to sort of self-govern itself, but with a British resident there telling them what to do, essentially. And that's how the British ruled most of India. So the British had two sort of ways of ruling India. They would either directly take over a kingdom, get rid of the king, and rule it directly from London, in which case the Governor-General would be in charge, or they would let the king or the queen stay in power, and they would put a resident in charge. So the British didn't directly control most of India, and that's what was supposed to happen to Punjab. Punjab was supposed to be indirectly controlled by the British. But as the British stayed there, the British realized that we can't trust the Sikhs to live up to this treaty. And the reason why is that the Khalsa army is just too proud. They are not going to just stand here and let us control their whole government, control their army, put limits on their government, put limits on their army. They're going to want to attack back eventually. And what the British do is that they buy out the rest of the nobles that are running the Sikh court, besides Rani Jind Kaur. She's the one figure who they're not able to pressure, who they're not able to buy out. So all the other nobles that are in the court, all the other sardars, as we call them, they're all bought out by the British. They all sell out to the British. And they then sign another treaty in December of 1846. So we're talking about 9 months after the first treaty, the Treaty of Lahore of March 1846. And this treaty is called the Treaty of Peroval. And in the Treaty of Peroval of December of 1846, December 16th, 1846, the British get to keep their troops indefinitely in Lahore. And the British get to stay in Lahore indefinitely. The British resident is in control of the government, and Dalip Singh and Rani Jind Kaur can't do anything without the British approval. And then we get to August of 1847, and the British are starting to get really frustrated because all the nobles, all the sardars have fallen into line. They're all backing the British because they're all scared of the Khalsa army themselves. And they're in favor of the British staying because they think that the British will keep them in power, will let them keep their lands, their jagirs, as we call them, their property that they get their tax money from. And they want the British to stay. Rani Jind Kaur is starting to really get frustrated by the British staying in Punjab. She wants to get rid of them, and she wants to have the government be independent again. And Henry Lawrence, the resident at Lahore, Henry Lawrence writes on August 9th of 1847, "I don't disguise for myself, nor do I wish the Governor-General to be ignorant of the fact that the Maharani is the only effective enemy to our policy that I know of in the entire country." So he says that the only person who's standing in our way of controlling Punjab completely is Rani Jind Kaur, and we need to get rid of Rani Jind Kaur in some way. That then sets up the next stage of Rani Jind Kaur's life.
Rani Jind Kaur's life is complex, from humble beginnings to queen to leader of the Khalsa army during its most desperate hour. After hearing about her life and legacy, I hope you have an answer as to how this individual captures this picture of determination and remaining unwavering in the face of fear. Join us next time as we dive deeper into her story. We continue to peel back the layers of what made her a fascinating queen who's remembered almost a century and a half later.
You are listening to Sikh Cast by Sikh Research Institute, illuminating every path.